Well, before we begin tonight, I wanted to, I got with Bob about a question he had last week. And he was asking if there was a connection with the eagle and a nation, perhaps. And to give you a clear, concise answer, maybe. Prophecy, looking back at the Old Testament, and seeing the fulfillments in Jesus gives us kind of an idea about how God is using revelation in the end times. And they do something, a lot of prophets sometimes do what they call telescoping. And to give you a good example of this is if you were to get on a real high building, say back in Statesville area, and you were to look north and you would see, say Pilot Mountain here, and you would see the Appalachian Mountains here, and it would look like from a far enough distance they were all together, but as you drove down the highway, you'd begin to see that there's a little bit of a distance between Pilot Mountain and the mountains. And sometimes the same thing goes with symbols and things of that nature. So there could be a dual representation. I mean, it's possible, but I don't think John had that in mind whenever he was writing it. But that's not to say that later on there couldn't be a fulfillment like that. It's just one of those things we'll just have to kind of, I guess, wait and see, as time continues. From what I've read in the commentaries, from what I've seen, I don't think there's a clear distinction there, through his writing. But that's not to say that, God may not have had an additional thing going on there. So just to try to give a little, just try to give an answer. I know that wasn't much of an answer, but anyhow, hopefully that was clear as mud. But anyhow, we're going to look tonight at Revelation chapter 9, and we're going to look at Trumpets 5 and 6. And then starting next week in chapter 10, we've got another interlude, another little pause that's going to happen between the 6th trumpet and the 7th trumpet. And in fact, the 7th trumpet doesn't even come along until the latter part of chapter 11. And then we have another major interlude that takes place, another pause that happens between the 7th trumpet and the 7 bowls of wrath. And when we go to the 7 bowls of wrath, which I don't think it comes along, John and I will look until about, I think, chapter 16, I think it was. And then they happen, bing, bang, boom, all together. So, by the way, if you'd like to catch any of our Bible studies, you can catch it there on the website there, youtube.com/PC Powerman. Also, considering our upcoming study, as we're talking about May 13th, which will be here in a few weeks, you'll each have a chance to vote for your top 3 studies that you would like to do. And here are the studies we're looking at doing next. We're going to look at doing perhaps a study on the parables of Jesus. There are about approximately 35 parables, so we'll look at that. Or a study on the book of Numbers, which would be about 36 lessons, about 36 chapters in the book of Numbers. The book of Daniel, which would be about 12 lessons. Then we'll do a survey of spiritual disciplines, which would look at prayer, different kind of disciplines like this, having time alone with God, strengthening devotions and things of that nature. We could have a survey of spiritual disciplines, approximately 10 lessons, give or take, and then a survey of the Bible, which we would take each night a different book of the Bible, kind of lay it out, what the book's all about, and then go through the Bible with that type of a survey. So be praying about that, see which one you feel the Lord is leading you to do, and then we'll go with what we have there. So in our last lesson, we were introduced to the first 4 of the 7 trumpets. And this lesson is going to continue the 7 trumpets by looking at trumpet 5 and trumpet 6. In fact, the lesson, as we follow Kendall Easley's outline, is very simple to follow. Verses 1 through 12 looks at the 5th trumpet, and verses 13 through 21 looks at the 6th trumpet. And so many believe that chapters 8 and 9 should have been compiled together in one chapter, but it would have made a real long chapter, so that may have been the reason they decided to break it in 2. But nevertheless, that's what we'll look at tonight. So first of all, we're going to look at the 5th trumpet, and this will take us in verses 1 through 12. So first of all, someone, if you will, read for us verses 1 and 2 of Revelation chapter 9.
So So the sun and the air will darken and fall in smoke.
All right, so the fifth angel sounds his trumpet, and John sees a star from heaven which had fallen to earth. Now, the important thing in identifying what this star is not an inanimate object. The star is in fact a being. And if you notice also, he says that he had seen that it had fallen. In other words, that it's been fallen for a period of time. So that kind of gives us an idea of what this thing may be that just or had failed. So more on the star in a moment. But we notice that that this angelic being, so to speak, opened this bottomless pit. And this bottomless pit, otherwise called the abyss, is a designation sometimes called Hades, but it represents the abode of the either the unrepentant dead or sometimes the grave. Even better known as the evil powers of the universe are located in this bottomless pit, in this abyss. So smoke fills the earth so much that the sun and the air were darkened. But many believe that the smoke is not necessarily a physical, literal thing that you see here, but in fact may even represent, as you see basically hell itself being opened up, a spiritual blindness, a spiritual smoke screen going across the earth that tends to blind the eyes of many people and lead them astray. So that's what many people believe this smoke very well may represent. So who is the fallen star? Well, let's take a look at a few things here. First of all, one thing is for certain, the star is not physical, rather it's a spiritual being, as it's denoted with this abyss, this bottomless pit. Some people have thought that maybe it was a good angel. You know, we talked about in extra biblical literature how there were 7 recognized angels, only 2 in the Bible. But some people have believed that it's one of those angels. However, the text notes that the star had already fallen, and it could have been that the star had fallen a great deal of time before John witnessed. So John has seen the effects of this star having fallen, but he didn't see the actual falling. So who is this star? Well, it appears to be Satan himself, the fallen angel who fell many years ago. When did he fall? I don't think anybody knows, but it was a long time ago. And we see 3 areas of support for this. First of all, the abyss is recognized as the abode of evil forces in Job 41, Isaiah 27, and also in Psalm 73, as well as Amos chapter 9. These evil forces are individuals or entities that are opposed to the working of God, in fact, opposed to God himself. These fallen angels are said to be imprisoned in the pit awaiting final judgment in 2 Peter 2:4. It's a place of torment until the time of judgment in Luke 8:31, as well as a place where the beast and the dragon are confined in Revelation 7, also 17 and chapter 20. Jesus uses, according to G.K. Beale, literally the identical expression to describe Satan's judgment as we see here representing the terminology for Satan in this abyss. Now the question I had going through this is that it appears that there are demons on the earth even now as we speak. For instance, in the New Testament, we see people who are possessed by demonic beings. And so my question is does it mean all demons are imprisoned here, or are there a particular segment? And the best thing I can come up with on this is that maybe lower-ranking demons maybe haven't been imprisoned yet. But I think looking at this as we move through this, you see that maybe this is Satan's cohort. Maybe these are his generals and lieutenants and sergeants, the heavy hitters of hell, so to speak, that are locked up, that are maybe released during this time. But anyhow, this star who had already fallen is Satan. These doors have been locked, but now it was released so that he could open up this pit and so unlock this abyss. And this indicates, as previously stated, the powers of hell have essentially come to earth. And so that kind of gives us a backdrop of what's going on. Now someone, if you will, read for us verses 3 through 6.
And their feet out of the smoke closes upon the earth, and unto them is given power as the scorpions of the earth have. And it was commanded them that they should not break the grass of the earth, neither did anything, neither any seed upon those men which have not the seal of God. torment was as the torment of the scorpion when he strikes a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them.
Now, verse 6, I think, is very interesting, and there's a lot of questions that come with that we'll look at. That we'll look at here in a moment in our discussion. But some people have posed that maybe these locusts could be something like helicopters. Again, this remains a possibility, and we can't say for sure whether it is or not. But what we definitely do see is that whatever is behind all of this is definitely demonic forces. Hell itself has been unleashed upon the earth, and that's what's going on here. You have all these demonic forces in full force invading the earth. Now, concerning the locust-like scorpions, now I found this kind of interesting. Ancient Roman historian Pliny, in his book Natural Histories, reported the existence of some form of scorpion that could actually fly, that had stingers on it that could actually sting people. Now, whether it was a real scorpion or one that looked like a scorpion or something like that, I don't know. But he said that there were some type of creatures back in that day and time that could do that. So this may have been a symbol for these demonic forces out in full force. And so the thing we also see in verse 5 is that throughout the seeming chaos, God still puts restrictions. They were allowed to torment, or they were allowed to sting or do whatever it was they were doing, but were not allowed to kill. And some see this torment only on unbelievers now. And I think at this time, you see the 144,000, those who were left behind, if you will, at this stage in the game, who were the people of God, the 144,000 at this time, they're not harmed. But for those who are rebellious and unrepentant and who remain that way, they find themselves tormented. And many people believe that this torment may be some type of psychological or emotional torment. For instance, consider Nebuchadnezzar back in the book of Daniel. He ended up, because of his rebellion, he was out in the field eating grass like a cow. Because he went completely mad because of demonic oppression that was on. Then you also see something similar in the Exodus story. You remember last week how these 7 trumpets really resemble the plagues in Egypt, and there are a lot of similarities? You even see some similarities here. In Exodus 9:27 through 35, Pharaoh and many others were convicted of their sin, but the problem is they kept refusing to repent. Pharaoh even got to the point in time, he says, I understand your God is the God. I understand that. I'm going to pray, to release these plagues. God demonstrated mercy, and what did he do? He rebelled again. And the Bible says he hardened his heart. He hardened his heart through this. So only those who have the seal of God will not be harmed. And again, this has a lot of similarity to the Exodus story as you see in that 10th and final plague in the book of Exodus. So and you also see some parallels in Luke chapter 10, verses 18 through 20 about the end times. But at this time, those who were inflicted will seek death, but they won't be able to die. And that's a big question to me. What does that mean? Does that mean that they have become incapacitated where they can't? Does it mean that they're tempted to do something to themselves but can't? Or does it mean something else? Maybe some type of advance in technology where they can't do it. I don't know. That's always been very interesting to me to think about what that could mean. But we're getting ready to be introduced to the description of these beings. So someone, if you will, read for us verses 7 through 11.
And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses, prepared unto battle. And on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. And they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron. And the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. And their power was to hurt men 5 months. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is
All right, so John uses what some commentators call the camera technique, and there's a couple of techniques that John uses through the book of Revelation, which Revelation's tough enough as it is, but sometimes if you understand these techniques that he uses, sometimes it kind of helps us. He uses that telescoping thing that I was telling you about, but he also uses a camera angle where what happens is a lot of times he'll take a look at the wide range view of what's going on, and then he'll focus in on a particular aspect of what he's talking about and give a description to that. So he's talking about this invasion of these demon locusts coming in, and now here he's giving a description of what these demon locusts look like. He says there are horses prepared for battle. This describes the great strength of these demonic foes and their being well prepared for battle. These are not a lackluster group of beings. This is a well-arranged army of adversaries coming for an invasion, and so to say. The heads appear to be like crowns of gold, which describes their victory and their appointed task. Their faces were like the faces of men, describing the intelligence of the entities. And let's be honest, Satan is, let's give the devil his due, pun intended. He's a sharp cookie. I mean, he's been at this for thousands of years. I mean, if he could take David, who was a man after God's own heart, and make him sin and stray, even Adam, who was in the very presence of God, Adam and Eve, and make them stray, we especially got to be careful. I mean, these demonic forces, they're no dummies either. They know what they're doing. They've been at this for a long time. And so, they're very serious opponents. They had hair like the hair of women, which didn't mean that they were... what this meant is the Parthians in ancient times, they used to wear long hair to indicate that they were fierce, they were ferocious. So this is most likely a reference to that. They were very fierce, intense. Teeth as lions. Well, anyone ever seen a lion or a tiger or a big cat fairly up close? I was at Surrey Community College one time, and they had a tiger there, and you had to pay to have a picture taken with a tiger where you can pet it, but the thing stunk. Not a lot of people were petting it, but that is a real pretty cat, and I almost was tempted to say, I'm just going to sneak in a little pet here. I thought, I saw the size of the paws and the teeth. I thought, I ain't going to do it. I ain't going to try it. Not even going to try it. I don't want to be a buffet dinner for a kitty cat right there. But, hey friends, let's have a buffet. That's probably what he would say. But anyhow, the teeth of a lion, a very ferocious animal, tearing flesh from bone. The fierceness and strength, again, appears a characteristic of this demonic power. A breastplate of iron indicates the strength of their defense. It almost seems as if they're invincible. And to us, if we were to stand against these individuals, these beings on their own power, we couldn't match it. I mean, let's be honest, we couldn't. It's only by the power of God that we stand a chance. And then sound of wings, like the sound of chariots, indicate that the demonic forces are brash and brazen. They're not like these ninjas sneaking in secret corners seeking to attack. No, they're brazen. They're loud. They've come to do business. They're intimidating, and so they have this loud sound, much like as you see in ancient times where they'd have these lines of forces coming in. They didn't care if you knew they were there or not. They were prepared for battle. They had their armament. They had their equipment, and they were ready. Tails and stings like scorpions describe the pain that these demonic forces afflict upon humanity, and even more so, the enjoyment that these demonic forces have in doing this. Why do you think maybe they enjoy it? Do you think maybe it's because we're the creation of God? What are some reasons you think maybe? This wasn't our discussion question, but just throwing it out there. Exactly. So perhaps when they see us, they see a glimpse of God, and they are absolutely opposed to God. So that being made in the image of God is very much part of it. And the fact that God loved the world, that He was willing to even give His Son, which shows the emphasis that God has for humanity. Also, we see the king over them, and I don't think that this is Satan here. Some people have thought that this is Satan. But there's another character here, which makes me think that the people in this abyss were maybe some of the high-ranking officials. God has angels, He has archangels, He has kind of a different array of positions of angels. It seems to be that Satan has the same thing. He had this king of demons, so to speak. This one called Abaddon in Hebrew, which means destruction, or Apollyon in Greek, which means a destroyer. This guy is a fierce individual and a cohort of Satan himself. So let's finish out this section with verse 12. If someone would read verse 12 for us. All right, now this goes back to the eagle we were talking about in verse 13, where the eagle says, "Woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth." The first woe has passed, which was the fifth trumpet. The next woe is to come, which is the sixth trumpet, and then I think the third and final woe would be the seventh trumpet, still yet ahead. Okay, so what we find here in verse 12 is it just serves as a transition. It's preparing us to let us know that this fifth trumpet is over, and we're changing scenes now to something else. Now, I wanted to mention that the issue we talked about with telescoping and the different techniques that John uses, because I think there's something very interesting that we're getting ready to see in the last part of this chapter. But let me switch gears here with our discussion. What do you make of that phrase, "Men will seek death and will not find it"? Do you think it means that people desire to die and just fear to do so? Or do you think it's a reference to perhaps some technological advance where health has become to the point where people can't die, for a period of time? Or what do you think about that? What do you think that means when he's talking about that? Yeah. Right. Right. And that's a good point too.
It seems like all the angels are a little bit busy. If he's not coming around making the rounds, maybe it's physically impossible for you to die. Was it preoccupied or something?
Dial 1-800-DEATH.
Yeah.
Sorry, leave a message. We'll get back to you in a moment.
I think we can see a little bit of that even with all the crimes that are being committed, and even this, the one that comes to mind, the shooting at the theater in Colorado.
Yeah.
He was going to be put to death originally, and then he changed his plea. And then just the other day, that 15-year-old kid in high school who took a gun and didn't shoot anybody, so he wasn't there to hurt anybody. It was one of the police that hurt him.
Well, I hadn't heard about this.
He shot the ceiling.
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing a little bit of that even in today's society. I think it's going to get more prevalent.
Makes you wonder if maybe that door is creaking open a little bit more and more as time goes on. be a good point. That's a good point. That could very well be.
I don't know if we do if there's a technological advance or just God in a way like that.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point too, because despite the technological advances, God's still in control of whether a person goes or not. So people may think they have the cure, but very well may not. That's a very good point.
You got all these people around the country now that are doing ISIS. Yeah, they don't want to participate in our society. They see the alternative is bad or death. It's harder.
That's true.
Well, it's what we're trying to do. Look what we do not. He has so much friends, but we are doing wrong in life. We got to do what you got to keep them there, and you keep them calm. We're hurting them, how we don't do it.
Well, that's a good point. Do you think maybe part of that's too that they're
You
thinking?
should force your nuts like you force your nuts.
Yeah. Do you think maybe part of it too is they're thinking they want to die, but wait, look at what all I've done to God. Maybe I don't want to just yet. And that's a good point too. Well, let me ask you a question. Bob brought this up. We're seeing some of this, and as I went through this chapter, I was like, oh my goodness, just what you said. It's like some of this stuff is already starting to be unleashed. It seems like. How do we face similar opposition to demonic forces today? I mean, obviously the scale is a lot different, but how do we face similar opposition to demonic forces today? Yeah, prayer is essential. Absolutely essential. A Christian without prayer is like a person trying to live without oxygen. I mean, it's just not going to work. You got to have that. Amen. Mm-hmm.
Even there's times when, there's violence like frustrated and to the point you don't know what to say. You just still have to go in and humble and ask him,
Oh yeah.
and just get it with him. And put things
That's right. That's my problem. Give it to God, but whoop, I want to pick it back up. Very good answers. And it's a lot that we need to think about, especially, the issue of prayer and giving things to God, as things increasingly get worse, it's going to be more and more important that we stay true to the fundamentals of our faith and to the disciplines that come, with the Christian faith. So we've looked at the fifth trumpet and the sixth trumpet. Again, I want to go back, as I mentioned again, about this thing of telescoping and a kind of a dual fulfillment. You see this in even some of the prophecies, like was it the 22nd Psalm? I think it was David who wrote that. He was applying it to something he was going through, but there was another fulfillment in Jesus on the cross. So there can actually be dual fulfillments that you have here, and even fulfillments that sometimes the writers had no clue that God was going to use in a particular form or fashion. So the sixth trumpet, and although, let me just say, I do think that a lot of the prophets did foresee a coming Messiah. I mean, let me clarify that as I go through this. But we see the sixth trumpet, and there are some very interesting things as we go through this, and I think you'll find very fascinating. So let's take a look first at verses 13 and 14, and if someone would read those two verses for us.
And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river of the flames.
All right, now here it really starts getting interesting, because now remember, John is in Patmos, And he still has, Zion is the place of Jerusalem. And Zechariah tells us in his prophecy that when Christ returns, he will set his feet on the Mount of Olives, and the Mount of Olives will split in two. And then that's going to usher in the millennial reign of Christ, when Christ establishes a kingdom on earth for 1,000 years. So Israel is in mind here with a lot of stuff going on, especially politically, the political goings on here. So the golden altar here has some symbolic overtones to it that we see first and foremost in verse 13. 4 represents completeness. The horns, as we've mentioned before, it represents strength. So you put those two symbols together, you have God's complete strength. Now this could be an altar, a literal altar in front of his throne. That's very well possible. But we hear someone's voice, and we're not told whose voice it is. Some people say that it's Jesus' voice. Some people say that it's the cry of the martyrs. Some people say that it's the voice of the Father, maybe the Holy Spirit. I would say that it's either Father, Son, Holy Spirit issuing the command here, and not the martyrs, for the simple fact that whoever it is saying this is giving a command to release something. Okay? So here we find the 4 angels last witnessed back in 7:1 holding back judgment, and we're going to get more into that as we move through this. Now the angels are permitted to proceed. They seem to release something, and the angels, we have to ask, are they good or evil? Are these good angels? Are they evil angels? We'll look at that in just a moment. But here's the thing I really want you to see that is very, very, very fascinating. Notice he says that they're bound by the great river Euphrates. Euphrates starts in an area called Armenia, but this river includes portions of Turkey, Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Now this is very interesting if you think about this, because this seems to be an invasion type of situation going on here. There are demonic powers, but they are having physical things going on with them, so it seems like there is some type of a war going on here, and it's coming against Israel, which is going to set up, the way I understand this, as a global conflict. And with everything going on, it just really is almost kind of eerie when you really think about it, with everything going on. So Paige Patterson says, the message from relatively peaceful Patmos is that of looming global conflict, Occident, which means the West, versus Orient, which means the East, and ultimately heaven versus earth in the dark days of the tribulation. So we also see, and we're going to come back to the angels in just a minute and try to seek to answer that question. Someone, if you will, read verses 15 and 16 for us.
And behold, angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of men. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them.
Okay, so that number, if I'm understanding it correctly, you're looking at something like 200 million armies coming up. 200 million, that is a massive campaign. We've also seen previously that a quarter of humanity was killed during the 4th seal judgment, and now a third is added on top of that. So if my calculations are correct, which I could be off, somebody correct me if I'm wrong here, about 58.3%, I believe, give or take some, that have been killed at this point. So again, over 50% of the global population has been eliminated because of these judgments going on. Now, here's the big question. Are these angels or demons? And I think you got to go back to chapter 7, verse 1 to answer that question. As you're going to see, unfortunately, I think it's going to be a continuing thing. Revelation's a tough book, and so with some of these symbols, there's a big question of who is this? What is this going on? So the question is, are these angels good angels, meaning they're angelic beings for God, or are they evil, opposed to God? So I think I've come across 3 views, and I'm going to give you the one I think is right. First of all, there's the views that the 4 angels are demonic, and J. Roloff in his commentary he said he's certain that these are wicked angels. So for those who hold this view, they believe that the demons have been held back until this time and released by perhaps other angels at this time. The 4 angels are angelic. Some people believe this is true. I think Paige Patterson holds this view, that the 4 angels are used to unleash godless forces. In other words, they somehow or another are holding back demons of oppression, and somehow or another the demons aren't mentioned here, he says, and that they are released to go into the world. And then there's the third view, and and this is the one I really think is true. If you go back to chapter 7, verse 1, you see that there are 4 angels holding back 4 winds. Now the 4 winds there represent the judgment of God. And so what I think is going on is that the 4 angels are heavenly beings. They're kind of like strong, can I use this term, Phil? Police officer angels. They have chained up and restrained these evil winds, these demonic forces, and at the command, they've unleashed the chains and stepped back, and they've been permitted to do their thing. Now, so in other words, even though it seems to be chaos, again, God has, by His permissive will, allowed these evil forces loose. Now, why has He done that? Well, because if you give a person enough rope, a lot of times they'll hang themselves. And I think that's what's going on with the evil forces here. Satan and all these evil forces, it's time for judgment, and he's bringing judgment upon the angels and for those who choose to go along with Satan. So someone, if you will, we're introduced to these horse demons, or these demon horses. Someone, if you will, read for us verses 17 through 19.
And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire, and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. But by these three was the third part of men killed, by the fire, by the smoke, and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth and in their tails. For their tails were like unto serpents, and have heads with them they do hurt.
Okay, so here these hellish horsemen representing the 200 million armies. Again, that's why I believe that the angels are of God. They're holding back these winds of judgment, which are these demonic forces. They've been tied up. Again, you've seen the abyss opened up. There's all these big-time general-like demons that's been released. And now you have these 200 million armies that are released. And the colors here are fire, which means red, hyacinth, or I think jacinth, I think is another translation, of sapphire, which is a dark blue, and brimstone or sulfur, which is a yellow type of color. And basically this follows along with fire representing, the destruction going on, the dark blue representing like the smoke, and then the sulfur representing disease that follows. But anyhow, the heads of the horses are like lions, which means they're fierce and they're intense. I never will forget one time I was teaching a study on Revelation, and I came out to church, and there was an Amish guy it was really late at night, there was an Amish guy who was driving his buggy, and he had these black horses, and those lights were shining on the horses. I'll be honest with you, I about had to use the bathroom early, because I thought the horsemen had already come by that time. But anyhow, the lion, very fierce and intense, out of their mouths proceeded fire and smoke and brimstone, which refer to their destructive force. And again, I think the third here represents the same third mentioned earlier. Or again, you could take, and maybe it's a third of the 58 that's left, which I don't know what would it be. What's a third of a 58%? 58. Anybody know? I'm not a mathematician by any stretch. But what's that? So about 19% more added on to the 58% already. So if that's adding on, you see quite a substantial amount of the world population being trimmed down quite a bit. Bill sees here, and here's something very important. Notice that out of their mouth comes this destruction. So he thinks there's not only physical destruction, but there's also spiritual destruction by these forces, which this does seem to be implied here. So not only are there physical things going on, but there's a lot of deceptions going on. Now here is, to me, one of the most astonishing things of the whole chapter. Despite the hellish horsemen, despite all these demons, to me, verses 20 and 21 are like, what? I mean, it's unbelievable to me. Someone, if you will, read verses 20 and 21 for us.
idols, gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood, which they neither see nor hear nor walk. And they did not repent of their murders, or their sorceries, or their sexual immorality, or of their thefts.
So those who face judgment, they're gone. They're gone. Those who are left past this judgment, they see everything that's taking place, and they still refuse to repent. Even though it's clear what's going on, they still refuse to turn it over to God. The work of their hands, we see in verse 20 that it focuses on sins against God. The works of their hands refers to perhaps placing one's activities over God, a form of idolatry. The worshiping of demons refers to theological deceptions allowed in one's worldview. If you look back at the issue with Pharaoh, Pharaoh had spent all of his life worshiping all these idols. And now it was demonstrated to him that he was wrong. It's a tough thing being told you're wrong. Don't you see Pharaoh telling Moses, now my daddy and my mama told me about these idols. My great-grandma and great-grandpa told me about these idols. Now who are you to tell me that they're wrong? Well, God demonstrated His power and basically said to Pharaoh, well, your mom and dad were wrong, and your grandparents were wrong, and your great-grandparents were wrong. I am the God of the world and not these fake idols. So these deceptions that people have allowed in their worldview is causing problems. Idolatry, which refers to placing any material possession over that of God. If I were to take my telephone and bow down and worship it, obviously that's what he was talking about, possessions, worldly possessions taking the place of God. Well, you also see in verse 21, sins against humanity. Now, Janice was talking about the Ten Commandments, and it's amazing the parallel of the Ten Commandments you see in these two verses. What you see here in verse 21 are sins against humanity. They would not repent of the murders. And obviously, what's the sixth commandment? Thou shalt not murder. God has created us in His image. We are supposed to, in our day and time, value other people, value other life, value people around us, loving our neighbors as we love ourselves. That's what the commandment's all about, valuing the life that God has created. Sorceries refer to magic arts such as witchcraft, other unchristlike practices, which are in violations, really, if you think about it, probably the first three commandments, at least the first and second one, and maybe the third. Immorality refers to sexual sin and is a violation of the seventh commandment. Let's be honest. You can't even turn on the television anymore. We had it on at 8 o'clock. It used to be that it was after 10 o'clock that the more risque type stuff come on. It was 8 o'clock and they had some type of music award show. In 5 seconds in there, it was crazy. It had already, we had to rush Grayson out before we could even turn the channel to the television. It had gotten so bad. Immorality, which is a violation of the seventh commandment that we see in the Ten Commandments. And then thefts. Boy, this really hits home, doesn't it? Taking something that doesn't belong to you. It's pretty clear cut. If we would just follow the Ten Commandments, our society would be a lot better off, wouldn't we? If we just follow the two great commandments, our society would be better off. It refers to stealing possessions of another, and this is a violation of the eighth commandment. It's important to remember this one point. Through all of this, and I think this is what we really see, through all of this, God is still extending His mercy upon whosoever will, if they would repent of their sins and turn to Him. He would put that seal upon them. But the problem is that through all of this, people are just not repenting. They're not willing to give it up and give it over to God. So what more must God do? He's given every opportunity under the sun. Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Anyone who opens the door, I'll come in to him. And sup with him. He's banging on the door here, obviously banging on the door, and just people are not responding to the gracious offering. So let's ask the question. We asked this a little bit. What are some ways that we face demonic powers today? What are some ways the demonic influences affects us in our lives? How are we affected maybe even in the church? Or how are we influenced by demonic powers today? How do you see these demonic forces tempting us and trying to get us off track even today as we speak?
Self-clothing, it's all about you and what you want, and it should always be your way.
Yeah. That's true.
But that's not, if you're always focused on yourself, how are you contributing to society and the positive thing?
That's a very good point.
Because you're not going to vote.
In fact, living that way seems to be opposite of what the Ten Commandments is demonstrating. That's a good point. That's a good point. Trying to impose will upon others. That's right.
Just look around ISIS, got the lesbian gay movement, all kinds of things going on every day around us, trying to influence what we as Christians believe and change our beliefs in the process.
Mm-hmm.
You got to include
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
I saw today, it's funny you mentioned that, I scrolling through, and that's a question I was going to ask Philip after the study's over. It dawned on me. But Japan Times, I think it was, it said, it said that, the government is a lot more corrupt than what, this is coming from a Japanese newspaper than what they ever thought. And so, you have that. It's an imposition of, it used to be that we could take the tagline and say we agree to disagree, but that seems like that's gone out the window anymore. Right, right.
We use the term society, and they try to convince the Christians that we are a minority. And we're not really a minority, we're just a quiet one in the group. Everyone is, society says, well, we're part of it too. So, I'm standing with three people, and the majority of the rules, as long as I'm loud enough, I can usually bring someone over, but when I'm told that I'm always in the minority, that everybody else wants it, well, I think we should keep our mouth shut. And that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to stand up, and we're supposed to evangelize, listen to a sermon the other day, and before I work, it says a lot of people do 2 or 3 things. You're supposed to worship God, you're supposed to come to God, and you're supposed to go out and bring people to God. And if we're doing 2 or 3 of them, it's sort of
That's a good point. It's a funny thing. The last time I checked, I think there were at least about 70%, maybe even 80% of the nation is Christian. And I fail to see how 80% is a minority. I've never.
When you listen to the news report, 58% of the people interviewed said they were for those marriages. Or either they didn't ask or the people that asked were about to say, well, no, I'm for it, whatever. And they either didn't hold their ground or they didn't actually like it.
When it comes to studies, I saw this about our educational system. They took a poll. This was in the local newspaper. They took a poll. I think it was a year or so ago. Took a poll and said that our state's schools ranked in the lower third of the nation's schools. Yet all the schools polled that ranked in the lowest third had 100% of the schools polled, whereas only 15% of the schools in the highest ranking state had their schools polled. And I thought, now how exactly is that fair? Take the 15 highest ranking schools and put that on up there, put them on up there, and then take 100% of our schools and put us down here. 2 and 2 don't make 4 there. It's just something not right. But
Well, there's a good telling few nights ago about the poll man that the poll is basically and not where anything considers people that they're told now, young ones that are told, of people that still have landline phones, and said so many of people do not have landline phones anymore, that they keep holding on the cell phone. So they said that they just really like hours and this and some of those that they're told are not of any value anymore on account of the fact that the people that they're holding really don't care.
And they always call on Sunday about 11:30.
Usually, is out, their job is to find everything that's going on that, they don't report good stuff. Anything that is objectionable or questionable or anything like that, that's what they're going to report. And that, when you start talking to that group of people, you're always going to get a very slanted outlook, period.
Absolutely. But let me close at this point, and then we'll move on. We're kind of running over time here a little bit, but give you case in point with what you were saying. I wrote an article this past week on my website, and about this supposed study. This came from an ultra left-wing newspaper online, and or not newspaper, magazine, and they were saying a recent study has the Christian right in fear that they have eliminated the need for God. Well, I actually looked to some reputable sources about what this guy actually did, and he actually believes in God, and said furthermore that he thought, my understanding was, unless I'm mistaken here, that this actually demonstrates how he thought God brought things into life. So there's a big spin on things, that's put on there, and things being said that's a lot of times just not even close to what the truth is. Or maybe a little segment of truth in there, but not anywhere close to what actually is going on. Good stuff there. That's true. It makes ministry a lot tougher because you want to help someone, but at the same time you don't want to enable someone. For instance, if someone's asking for money, if you give them money, well, they may use that money to go get another joint or another, if alcoholic, another something like that, or another hit of heroin or whatever the case may be, and so. I think you got a good point. I think we have to be salt and light, innocent as doves and wise as serpents, I think, in the society that we're in, and that's for sure.
Students first have to have respect of the professor. Obviously, we do. Therefore, his only alternative is appointment. When the school replaces they kick him out. So his burdens will not stand. But there again, if you don't have respect, you can't expect respect.
Then if you have no way of enforcing something, I mean, it's just not going to work. I come across a story as we go through our principles and applications here. This was actually one of the commentaries. I thought it was really good. It's come off an episode of Gunsmoke. How many of you ever watched Gunsmoke? Quite a few. There was an episode of Gunsmoke. Now, I must have missed this one, but there was a little huckster coming through town, who had this table set up with a glass on top of it and had a rattlesnake in the bottom. And everybody could see the rattlesnake. And he would had a bet, placed a bet. Said, stick your hand in here on top of the glass, and if you leave your hand on the glass, the snake can't bite you, but if you leave your hand on the glass while the snake tries to strike you, you'll win. If you don't, I'll win. And so everybody placed their bets and stuff like that. And sure enough, he put his hand on the table, on the glass, and they saw the rattlesnake start shaking, and that thing got coiled up, and he leapt up, and sure enough, his hand went back like that, and he lost the bet. Well, the commentator says, and he's got a good point, the good news is if we remain on the right side of the glass, the snake can't bite us. And I thought that was a tremendously good point. If we remain true to God, we remain true to Him, that's not to say that we're not going to have trials and temptations. That's not to say even that we may not lose our lives for the cause of Christ. But as long as we stay on the right side of the glass, Satan can't hurt us spiritually speaking. And the good news throughout all of this is there's coming a day when God's going to recreate everything. We'll be resurrected, and the end point in mind, keeping the end point in mind that God's going to bring a creation where there's no more evil and no more despair whatsoever. A few points and we'll close. God will judge rebellion and wickedness. You can take that to the bank. Secondly, God sometimes brings judgment by His permissive will, or that is loosening His reins on the power of evil. And I think you see this all throughout history. Nations, when they turn away from God, I think God's got that His protective hand on nations so long as they're close to Him. But once they start rebelling against Him, He says, all right, you want to have it your way. Starts loosening that protective hand, and then the powers of evil start coming in and going loose, running wild. And so the forces of evil are well organized and very powerful. We've got to take them seriously. Sometimes evil takes out evil, but all evil will eventually be taken out by God. Human sin is rooted in rebellion, and we see that through the Ten Commandments. As Faith was mentioning, our self-centeredness is part of that rebellion, instead of devoting to God. Christ-likeness is found in keeping the Ten Commandments. I really believe that the 10 great commandments, or even the 2 great commandments, you can't go wrong if you stay within the parameters of just those 12. Those with hardened hearts may refuse to repent even during the most severe warnings and punishments. And God will protect His own. While Christians have suffered death physically, they will never suffer spiritual death, which is a death that lasts eternally. So next week we're going to take a look at chapter 10. We're going to take a pause, and we see a strong angel. As a matter of fact, this is an enormous angel coming down with a little book, and we'll take a look at what that book is and that angel before we close. Next week. Are there any questions or comments before we close? If not, Burl, would you mind closing us with a word of prayer?
Please live in the